Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Mhm. So I'm just going to get started with the welcome. Um, if everyone's ready. All right. Welcome to this webinar for Kansas Students for Conservation. My name is Chamiru Liyanawaduge, a senior in the Green Tick Academy at Olathe West High School, and I'm proud to co-found this coalition with my advisor, Laura Downey. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Chamiru. I'm Laura Downey. I'm the executive director for the Kansas Association for Conservation and Environmental Education, and I am currently the co-chair for Kansans for Conservation, which we will talk to you a little bit more about. And I will pass it to Josh, please.
Hmm. Yeah, hello everyone. Josh Rowe, and I serve as the CEO of Kansas Corn Growers Association and the Kansas Corn Commission. I'm also a seventh generation farmer, so very passionate about this from several angles.
Fabulous. And since most of the people are watching the recording, Sherry, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Sherry Coster, the Jewell County Conservation District Manager and landowner in Jewell County.
And Shaylee?
Hi there, Chaley Brown. Sorry, my camera isn't working, but I am with the Pottawatomie County Conservation District, and I'm also the chair of the Kansas Envirothon.
Thank you. And Amanda?
Sorry, it said I was unmuted. Amanda Johnson, Mitchell County Conservation District.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I know a lot of folks signed up so that they could get the recording after the fact. So we will make sure that we pass that on to you all and also the other folks who registered. Just a quick little agenda for today. We'll be doing I'll be doing an introduction to Kansans for Conservation and what we have been up to. The director for Kansas Corn, Josh Rowe, will be talking about why it matters with agriculture, and then why it matters for youth and students. Chamiru will be taking that, and we'll be talking about opportunities to get engaged and answer any questions that you have. And we may end a little bit quicker since we've got kind of a small group on, but we welcome you today and hope that we can help get some high school and college students involved in this initiative. So Kansas for Conservation is really about how do we strengthen the conservation efforts that are happening here in Kansas. And it matters in Kansas because Kansas is 13th overall in land mass in the United States. We're a big state comparatively. We're sixth in agricultural production, and we're one of, it depends on whose information you use, but one of 15, maybe 14, and possibly even 13 states that does not have designated conservation funding in our state. All of the white states are the ones that don't, although North Dakota actually does have something and Oklahoma does have something as well. We're surrounded by states that have conservation funding in place of some sort or another. And um, to kind of highlight the need for this, there was 86 million in unfulfilled requests from Kansas producers last year alone. And that means that there's a tremendous need in our ag community. And Kansas is also the last among our neighbors in terms of being able to access land and conservation funds. And that happens largely because we don't have the match that's required to be able to access those funds. We know there's a need, there's a strong need, and that is part of what got this group going, the Kansans for Conservation. And here's a little bit of a timeline of how we got started. In 2017, there was a group of folks who started to get together and saying, we really need some dedicated funding for conservation in Kansas. And in 2020, we became a 501c4 organization, which is an organization that is allowed to lobby. In 2023, we really went strong after the state water plan funding and getting historical levels of funding for water in our state through the state water plan fund that's run through the Kansas Water Office and the Kansas Water Authority. And we also began drafting a conservation funding bill in 2023. We launched some social media accounts. So you can see there was like a period of time that we spent a lot of time working behind the scenes trying to get efforts together. In 2024, we actually introduced House Bill 2541. We had a state advocacy day at the legislation at the State House where we talked to legislators. We had over 40 organizations that supported the bill when it was introduced, and we did an informational briefing and hosted a legislative luncheon. Unfortunately, the bill didn't go anywhere in 2024, so we are back at it today in 2025, going forward in 2025, with a strong coalition of 39 diverse members. And we like to call this the NASCAR slide for Kansans for Conservation. And we've tried to organize this in some way that it makes sense or in some fashion, but you can see, since we have a lot of conservation district folks on, that the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts was one of our founding members of this coalition. They're a part of this, but also Kansas Corn with Josh here today, Kansas Farm Bureau, several other ag-related entities. We have several nonprofit organizations, including our organization and the Kansas Recreation and Park Association, to name a few. We have some commercial entities that are supporting this effort, like General Mills and Evergy. And then we also have wildlife-related organizations like Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, National Turkey Federation, Ducks Unlimited, etc. And we present this slide because we want you to know that while sometimes in this field we can get into a little bit of controversy, there's really a strong agreement and consensus that we need to get some funding in our state to support these conservation efforts. And as I like to say, I believe that conservation provides common ground that we can all stand upon. And so that is really at the heart of what this coalition is about. The funding bill, just to give you a little bit of background, there were 3 important things to the coalition that we wanted to make sure happened within the funding bill and that we will be introducing again in 2025. And that means there's no new government. We're not creating new entities. We do not want to initiate new taxes or new fees to be able to do this. And we want to work to streamline funding so that we can move dollars from the state to on-the-ground conservation as effectively as possible. So where does it go? The funding sources would go into a conservation fund that would be distributed across 3 broad areas. 25% of it, we were aiming at about $60 million, by the way. So 25% of it would go to land and recreation. 50% of it would go to 25% of it would go to parks and recreation. 50% of it would go to working lands. And the additional 25% would go to wildlife. And education is a theme that runs underneath all of those things. So education around getting people outside, around agriculture and working lands, and around wildlife is a part of that. We would access federal and private match, and that would ultimately help us to create a sustained mechanism to ensure the legacy of our natural resources in the state. And we have a needs assessment that is coming down the pike. We've worked with some professors from Kansas State University, and they did some exhaustive interviews with stakeholders that are in the conservation field, both in agriculture, recreation, and wildlife. One of the key issues that kept coming up over and over again is that we have under-resourced organizations, not enough personnel, we have reduced capacity, and many organizations that are on the ground that are working with budgets of less than $500,000. We know that we're missing opportunities, and all of the organizations that were interviewed have definitely clear priorities if funding were available. We know what to do. we need the resources to be able to do it. And so this Kansans for Conservation initiative is really designed to put us into place to do that. And I know that Chamiru will talk about this a little bit more, but we will be hosting a day at the Capitol to kick off our 2025 work on this legislation. On February 25th, we'll have opportunities for coalition members to table in the rotunda, and then we'll be doing some coordinated visits and talk with key legislators during that time. So that is a little bit about where we have been with Kansans for Conservation. And what brings us here today, most importantly, is that we recognize that while we had this diverse group of stakeholders providing us with input, what we didn't have were students and young people providing input into this, and felt like it was very important to do that because this is really about their future. And so that is driving us in this meeting here today. So I'd stop here and ask if there are any questions that I can answer at this point about sort of the history and the legacy of Kansans for Conservation and where we are. And you can unmute yourself or you can pop them in the chat, either way. We'll continue to have questions here, but I would like to put this call to action in front of you. We know that there's a need for conservation funding in the state of Kansas. We know that we're surrounded by states that are doing better than we are in terms of having that dedicated funding. We know that we can work legislation to pass a bill to get the funding into the state that would support our working lands, our people, and our wildlife, and that our state would thrive economically and environmentally. Why right now? Because we have a strong and diverse coalition. We have a needs assessment that tells us that we need to be doing this, and we have the plans in place and the strategy in place to do it. And so our call to action is for both students and organizations to be educating and mobilizing your people, participate in the day in Capitol, and communicate with your legislators so we can take this across the finish line this year. And that is our call to action for Kansans for Conservation. So I will turn it over to you, Josh, and I am going to stop sharing my screen unless you want people staring at your fabulous picture this whole time.
However it works. So, yeah, so welcome and thanks for those that are joining us live and then, ultimately watch this recording. Said before, Josh Rowe serves as the CEO of Kansas Corn and also a seventh generation farmer, manage my family's operation in Republican Jewell counties in north central Kansas. And then I live in Pottawatomie County and also have some rangeland there. So good to see great well-known faces from Jewell and Pottawatomie counties joining us today. But speaking for Kansas Corn, we were, very eager to join this coalition. It really coincided with a lot of conversations that, I had with not only our grower leaders on our board, but farmers across the state. As we really see the impact and the great things that have happened in those other states. That map Laura showed before, we're a pretty small minority when it comes to states that have dedicated conservation funding. And you go to our neighbors to the east, neighbors to the north, have some really good programs in place that their producers have access to through that. And even some of the states that don't specifically have maybe constitutionally funding, like South Dakota was one of those states that doesn't have constitutional funding. They have some ongoing programs I'll talk about a little bit later that are just phenomenal and have been very successful for wildlife efforts, natural resource efforts in their state through that. And then so we saw that. And the other thing was just a lot of peer economics. I use our West Central Kansas board member, Tanner McNitch. He's a fifth generation farmer out there. And Tanner recalls, growing up when it was like opening pheasant season, which is the second weekend in November. Just his very rural area, very sparsely populated, was just full of people. The towns were bustling with out of state and definitely out of region hunters, and that brings with it a lot of economic activity. Every little motel out there was full. The churches, the community organizations, that was some of their biggest fundraising of the year was, feeding the hunters, doing different things out there. And there's just been a lot of those issues that have been lost. And so we were having these, conversations, and was just really excited to see Kansans for Conservation officially stand up and join as an agricultural organization. And, we strongly encouraged some of our other counterparts in the state to join as well. And so last legislative session, I had the opportunity to, participate throughout the day, but the day ended, we had this bill that's HB 2541. Was said there. It had a hearing in the House Agricultural Committee, and I got the opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the agricultural organizations through that. And what I really, focused on in my work to the legislature in this is it was really twofold. And the first being that going back to what Laura mentioned, Kansas, we're a very large state by area, and close to 90% of that land mass in Kansas is agricultural use. So that's either cropland, rangeland, hay ground, and other forms of agriculture. And a very vast majority of that is also privately owned land as well. Not a lot of public land opportunities in terms of percentage compared to other areas. So for those that care about wildlife, natural resource conservation, those efforts have to happen on private land. We're not a state like Colorado that has over 50% of their lands being public, so it's pretty easy, or relatively easier, for them to look at conservation practices, regulations, and all of that. But also keeping in mind, which is really core to a lot of the agricultural organizations that are part of Kansans for Conservation, is this really big desire to withhold private property rights through that. And so what we see is really refreshing when I say we, the agricultural groups through there, is this whole working lands conservation concept. And to kind of put that in perspective, you go back to farm policy, maybe the 1980s through the mid 1990s. A lot of the conservation programs, farm programs, were focused on ultimately pretty successful program called CRP, or the Conservation Reserve Program. And that focus was taking vast swaths of land out of agricultural production and, idling them in grass with some management and some other grazing allowed for other pieces there. And in turn, that can have negative impacts on local economies if there's less agricultural production, be that crops or cattle in an area. The people that make a living supplying inputs to those industries, their incomes go down. If there's less receipts, cash receipts off the land, that greatly impacts the local community as well. And so working lands conservation practices, which as showed in that slide, which would be about 50% of the funds, if this is ultimately successful through there. It focuses on kind of this duality of using the land in both ways. And I have, that's something that's really my passion on this. I mentioned my roots, longstanding roots on the farm, and just seeing how efforts that conserve our natural resources, our water resources on the land, not only benefit, wildlife, water quality, all of those important issues, but they also can have very good economic returns for the agricultural side through that. I know my family farm. We've got fields it's been over 30 years. Our farms are all in continuous no-till, so the soil is never disturbed. We also, highly utilize that land. Our fall harvest concluded about 8 weeks ago through that, and not long after the combines are out of the field, the livestock goes on to graze the land. We utilize cover crops where they're that, and so it's really highly utilizing the land. But those practices are also very beneficial to wildlife, to water quality, reducing runoff, and can come up with just examples happening on my own land literally today. As we speak, today happens to be the opening day of a deer season, so we have deer hunters from several different states out on our farms. Some of the conservation practices we've invested in grass waterways with sediment basins that capture, reduce soil and nutrient loss off the edge of the field are also wonderful waterfowl habitats, so have been utilized by waterfowl hunting. And then just this past Saturday, one of my board members and my son and we walked all around our land in Jewell County, where Sherry's from, and we'll also mention Sherry's on here. She's my second cousin, and our families go back generations in this, so was right by her homestead, and was happy to see strong and growing quail populations. We even have some prairie chickens in that area as well. So this piece, it all works together for each other, and just looking at different programs that could happen to encourage additional working lands things, not only looking at cost share practices, but just different management practices that don't cost a lot. A program that I'll mention from South Dakota that my counterparts at South Dakota Corn have been highly supportive and involved in is utilizing technology to really look at every acre of your farming operation, what the productivity is of that land, because a lot of times some of our areas on the field borders, and especially those that are near bodies of water, those tend to be some of our lowest productivity acres. They'll catch the highest amount of runoff. Sometimes there's a lot of tree roots underneath if it's near a riparian area that reduces the moisture available to crops. So a lot of times it makes more economic sense to not farm that acre and put it in some sort of a buffer strip or whatever, which is great for water runoff, great for wildlife habitat and that. And so that's a good program. There's also another program in South Dakota on the wildlife side that works on incentives for controlling predators that have been proven to adversely impact like upland bird population. So there's just a lot of different options out there. Wildlife and parks are a major recipient, 25% of this, and really strengthening some of those programs like walk-in hunting and others that will give the public greater access to these private lands. So there's lots of good programs through this and through that. And I think kind of covered the main highlights of really what excites us and why we're excited to continue this torch. And we've already begun a lot of legislative outreach and hope to have a good contingency of our grower leaders at the day at the State House and coming up the end of February through there. So happy to take any questions now. And I saw a couple that popped up in the chat, Laura, but I was too busy talking to fully read those. Did they apply to me any?
Your second cousin, which is
Yes.
that's hilarious.
Yeah. Hi, Sherry.
So Sherry was saying that KACD has their conservation at the Capitol Day on February 9th, and that we'll be there on the 25th working this bill and basically wanting to determine if that was correct. And that is correct. And I was saying that on the, we were aware because Dan with KACD, with the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, is on the leadership team for Kansans for Conservation, and he let us know that you all would be up there on the 9th, but we really wanted a day dedicated to working this bill that was really focused on that. So we hope that
Laura,
Yes.
Laura, I had a typo on that, and luckily Chaley, who's a Jewel High School graduate, mentioned that it's really February 4th. So I had a typo on that, but she caught that. So.
All right, good deal. Thanks, Sherry. So we would be really interested in having conservation district managers, and we're also really interested, like I said, in getting that youth voice out there too. So if you know of students who would be interested in getting involved in helping to advance this work, we'd be really interested in them, including the possibility of having them come to the day at the Capitol and have conversations with legislators, because I think it's really important that people hear from youth about why this is important to them. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, and if there's no questions now, I'll turn it over. And if you're watching this recording or anything else comes to mind, you want some more information, especially from the ag team's involvement, it is pretty easy to look up my contact information. Happy to do that. Everything is on our website, kscorn.com, and would be happy to speak more with your organization or entity.
Thanks, Josh.
Good. And I think next is Chamiru. He's going to come next. And this is another big piece. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk for 10 more seconds through here. I think what really excites me through this is just getting more of that youth involvement. That's one of the funnest things. I have a 9-year-old myself, and I find the more time that we're outside working on the farm or spending some time outdoor recreation, it's less time in front of the TV and smartphones and tablets, and I can just see a market change through there. So I think that is a really good secondary benefit of getting younger people involved to carry this, make sure these efforts last generations. So with that, I'm going to be quiet now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I'll get started. As I said before, my name is Chamiru Liyanawaduge. I'm a senior in the Green Tech Academy program at Olathe West High School. We are heavily involved in conservation and green industry learning around those things. And yeah, that's a tiny bit about what I'm doing at Olathe West. Now, conservation is incredibly relevant, and it's an important topic of today, but it's even more important within the context of tomorrow. As we're in the golden age of youth advocacy and participation, we must continue to push young people to the forefront of modern solutions to conservation's most pressing issues. The earlier that youth can start getting involved in initiatives such as these, the greater impact they will have on their communities and the world as we know it. As a student-led coalition under Kansans for Conservation, Kansas Students for Conservation has direct connections with many partners that can help these students with the outreach and getting into the industry. This coalition aims to form a network between industry professionals and next generation leaders who are eager to learn more about all aspects of conservation, whether through business-based, STEM-based, or interdisciplinary learning experiences. At the end of the day, environmental education in the state of Kansas has yet to meet its full potential, and I am eager to invite you all to help us reach that potential. Ready for the next slide? As a new member of Kansans for Conservation and a co-founder of the Student-Led Coalition, I had the opportunity to attend the Governor's Conference on the Future of Water in Kansas, at which I attended a workshop regarding satellite technologies and their applications for Kansas agriculture. These experiences simply can't be created within the boundaries of your high school classroom. In my attendance, I also had the opportunity to network with industry professionals and ask questions about conservation efforts throughout Kansas. These opportunities showed me that, given the opportunity to connect and ask meaningful questions, students can learn practical skills and knowledge that they can bring back to their respective communities and help them flourish. Ready for the next slide? Students can seek success in any capacity they wish. Our coalition will provide connections and support in individual, community, and coalition level work. On the individual level, coalition members can write letters to editors, create community presentations, write school newsletter articles, and harbor engagement in conservation efforts through social media. Along with these experiences, students can further connect with partners at Kansans for Conservation to learn more about social media outreach and more independent projects. Moving on to the community level, students can network with leaders in the field and build relationships with their communities. By forming clubs, writing lessons for younger students, and interacting with community groups, coalition members can learn more about outreach, promote change in their communities, and add stellar work to their resumes, all with the coalition's support to encourage their engagement in conservation. Moving on to the coalition level, members can learn the ins and outs of the legislative process and how to get into contact with their local legislative leaders. As someone looking to go into public policy myself, I find this is an incredible avenue for students such as myself to bridge the gap between making changes in our schools and making changes in our cities and even states. The coalition intends to expand opportunities like the Day at the Capitol so more students have access to the resources and connections they need to make their voices heard. As our numbers expand, so does our reach within the conservation community. Become a part of something bigger than yourself, bigger than the present. Be at the front of the line. Lead the next generation into a new era of innovation and a love for one's environment and the urgency we must have in conserving it. Now, I'd like to share with you a quote that means a lot to me as a young conservationist. Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to body and soul alike. This was by John Muir. He was a very influential American conservationist and writer, and these words speak a lot to me as a young conservationist, because I really do think that the environment needs to have a very special place in all of our hearts, and we won't have a future without it. And that's why it's so crucial, is because it doesn't only feed us, it provides us with emotional and mental wellness resources, and it provides us with connections that we can make with other people in our community. And it's something that all of us experience and that all of us can really rally around and gather around, regardless of political affiliation or education or anything else that may seem to divide us in any other topic. The environment really finds a way to unite us in that way. Well, if there are any questions, I'd like to open it up to anyone else. But aside from that, yeah, that's all I have. And of course, get involved by scanning the QR code.
And I will mention, since we have mostly adults right now, that this is particularly aimed at getting students involved. We are very much interested in getting a student coalition together, as Chamiru very elegantly articulated, in different opportunities engaging around conservation and in this coalition work. voice, as Josh also are very well articulated, is so important to the work that we're doing. And Chamiru, you didn't actually say it, but in your slide you said it's important to hear the youth voice, that legislators hear the youth voice for legislation that will succeed them, that will be beyond them. And so we're very interested in engaging and thinking about how we can get more students engaged in this work. So that QR code is directly linked to an opportunity to get engaged with students both at the high school and the college level in this work. So yes, any questions or any comments at this point? I'm going to use my teacher wait time and just be quiet for a minute.
Can you hear me, or have I muted myself? Okay. Have the FFA organizations been contacted? I was just kind of curious on that, or the local Envirothon, the schools who had sent local Envirothon teams. I just wondered if they'd been contacted.
Yeah, so I'm currently I'm serving as the reporter for the Olathe West Chapter of FFA, and I'm currently in contact with my FFA advisor to increase outreach through my FFA connections all throughout the state of Kansas. So on the FFA front, I'm continuing to work closely with my advisor to really network with Kansas chapters of FFA.
But we could sure use some help, Sherry. And Envirothon team members would be other students, I think, that would naturally be interested in something like this too. And if you all can help us to get the word out to those students, that would be super helpful. And as any of you know, trying to get words out to schools can be sometimes challenging because they're very good at blocking emails from coming into the schools. So, and we've shared it out with the Kansas Association of Biology Teachers and the Kansas Association of Teachers of Science as well. So we've been primarily trying to get to adults to get to kids. And so any assistance that you all can provide with folks that you know on the ground would be greatly appreciated.
I also have some contacts for Envirothon advisors, which would lead into students. And if, we wanted to touch base on, sharing emails or whatever, I could certainly get that to some
Shayla,
Envirothon advisors for you.
that would be great, Shaylee. We would appreciate that. And we had some students and teachers sign up that I know this timing might not have been great for them. So I hope that they will be watching the recording and getting students involved that way. But I don't think it hurts at all to get the word out in different ways. Anything else? Any other questions? Any final words from you, Mr. Rowe?
No, just appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit from the ag perspective in this, and happy to speak with other groups if there's any specific questions, or we could take a deep dive on some of the other programs available.
And Chamiru, any words from you?
Yeah. Something like this has always been something that I've been incredibly interested in. As a younger student, I'd always wanted to be more involved in legislation and public administration and public policy, but I didn't know where to start. And it's a really big discrepancy in our current government and cities is we don't have enough connections between our youth voice and the legislators who are really writing this legislation that again will succeed them, will be looked at and will be experienced by the future generation more so than themselves. And so that's why this is really near and dear to my heart, is because I so want to just expand these opportunities for students such as myself, and other students who may not even know that they want to do this work in the future. And yeah, I really hope that you guys resonate with that message, and that we can continue to do some great work.
Thanks, Chamiru. All right, if there are no other questions, I will thank you all for joining us. Excuse me, tickle. Whether you're joining us live, sorry, or watching the recording afterwards, I am a good person to reach out to. I'll be sending the recording out. If you have questions, if you want to get in touch with Chamiru or with Josh or myself, please email me to do that. Sorry. Perfect time for my voice to go out. But thank you all for joining us today. And Josh and Chamiru, if you'd stay on for just a minute, I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. We'll send out the recording.